It's a Friday afternoon, June 12th. Beautiful day here in Bloomington, Indiana. My name is Charles Brandt, and I'm here with my friend and teacher,
Debby Harris. Charles is my friend and teacher also.
We've had some great conversations on the topic of yoga before, and now that we're in this time of changing our practice, if you will, like it's a time of, we have a lot of time, or different uses of our time, to explore our yoga practice, or at least that's what I've been doing.
Well, I will tell you that one of my, I would call it practices or studies or explorations, I've been finding myself, I take my dog on a walk in a creek most mornings, and it's a long walk, longer than I would ever have been doing normally. And I walk the exact same path, more or less, every single time. And so it's become just a sort of a setting, just like a yoga studio is a setting for for a more physical practice. It's sort of this setting I go in, and it just like regular yoga, like it takes me a while to kind of settle into the woods. So I might walk in, and I hate to admit it, but like sometimes it takes me a second to like not check my email and make sure I know what the weather's gonna be like for the day. So sometimes I'm not in the forest immediately. But I know, just like when you're doing a physical practice and maybe the first couple of sun salutes, your brain isn't in it, or your mind is wandering, and sometimes not. Sometimes, first inhale, woo, good.
Right.
But sometimes not. Sometimes
Right.
it takes a little bit before you settle into the practice and you can calm that little fussy...
Mental chatter?
Yeah, right, exactly. Chitta-vritti, right? And I also think, yes, and I sometimes think of it as like a baby that's fussy, and then once you can just get it to calm down, everything will be like, good.
Yeah.
And so it's fussy baby or chitta-vritti or, chatty mind. But then at some point, usually, hopefully not too long into it, I look up, and so I walk down the hill, and there's this creek, and then all the trees are up, and no matter what time of day it is, it's shady. Like you could never wear sunglasses here. But it's become sort of like a marker, sort of like standing on the front of your mat kind of thing, you know what I mean? Or going to the studio or whatever it is. It's become sort of a door.
Point of reference.
A point of reference. I think it's become a habit. So that I get in there and I start maybe thinking about something and thinking about what we might be talking about. It's been interesting to recognize ritual. Like how ritual helps create a context where things are invited, right? So certain thoughts are invited, certain ways of thinking are invited.
And reinforcing those, maybe?
Or allowing for them,
yes.
Maybe. In your daily life, even if you have time, you might not be thinking about sort of philosophical ideas. But this seems like this is the space for it. Like it feels... Well, one, it feels spacious. I know how much, and I have time, and there's quiet.
Yes.
I'm the only one out there. Like my dog, everyone's all, but she's on her own, and it's slow enough that things can come up and then be thought about, and then things can go away, and then it's okay. Like I'm not like, oh, I didn't finish that thought. I mean, the thought comes, it sits, it maybe spreads out, maybe it changes itself a little bit, and then it comes back from an unexpected angle, and surprises me. You know what I mean? Like I'm like, a new idea.
Yes.
Because there was sort of room for that to happen.
Yes. It's almost like a walking meditation then. Right?
Yes.
I think sometimes we call our yoga practice a moving meditation.
Exactly.
And there's different types of meditations, I think.
Right. And this, I think of when we do a moving meditation in yoga, one of the positive ways that can be expressed is that we are just breathing and moving and get really in tune with that. Like you're talking about, that mental chatter goes away. And here I feel like, at least on these walks, that the mental chatter still goes away, but there's more thinking thoughts with words and ideas, more than I feel like if I'm really in sort of the flow of a yoga practice. I feel like sort of more classic meditation where you're not thinking about anything. And here I feel like it's creating space to have thoughts. So it's a little bit different like that. Does that make sense?
To work with those concepts, maybe. In my study of yoga and these other types of meditations and practices, some of these thoughts are really hard to get your mind around, and it seems like some of them are talking about, well, not using your mind at all in some cases.
Right.
Which is really hard to then talk about or think about. And I think you need that space, that time in nature, in the woods, to just let them wash over you in a way.
Absolutely, right. And that's great, because it's instead of us like directing them, you know, when we want to get something right, if I want to get a math problem right, I'm going to work harder and harder and harder until I get it right. And I feel like with these ideas, you have to, it's not where it's washing over, is opening up to being washed over and sort of letting go.
Absolutely.
Right? And letting them come, and
yes,
and not having an opinion about where it's going to go.
Yes. I think I've mentioned to you that I've been reading and studying with the Zen group. It's been interesting to get a different perspective on some of these topics, because I think it's a case of one truth, many paths type of thing.
Absolutely.
Where you get a different perspective on how a group or a school approaches these topics. And what you just said reminds me of one of their key principles, is opening the hand of thought. So it's not that you're not thinking, it's you're just letting the thoughts be.
And not corralling them or manipulating them or directing them, just letting them. I like that. And funny, because I was just today thinking about the different schools of thought, and that by exploring different schools of thought, it helps us to find out what it is that resonates with us, because there's all this other stuff that every school of thought, every religion, every type of philosophy, there's all these other stuff too that maybe we don't want or that we don't believe. But like, if the more the different schools that we look at, and then all of a sudden we realize there's these that you could, and I love the idea of picking and choosing. I know some people would think that's, you know, like you take a school of thought and you embrace it. I like the idea of being like, this I believe in from here and that, and then seeing how they all
fit together.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just that different perspective that gives insight to a concept that you've had trouble working with or grasping.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, with that different perspective, it's like, aha.
Right. And because you kept looking at it through the way you had looked at it, and so you couldn't see it differently.
Yes.
And then you come from this completely different angle, not even knowing you're going to your point, and then all of a sudden, it's like this back door and a secret. And I love that.
Me too.
I love that. And it helps, because I feel like there's certain concepts that are must be very hard to share with other people. And so whoever is teaching us has certain metaphors or perspectives or, you know, ways of framing things that must resonate for lots and lots of people. But if it doesn't resonate for me personally, then there's not a lot of other ways that
for them to illustrate that concept.
Right. Because they're like, but this is clear, and it is, right? It is clear to them and to others. But if you can't see it, you just can't see it.
Right.
And so, to have someone or something else give you a different path to it.
Yes. And I think that's one of the great things about conversation and listening to the ways that other people describe these concepts or work with these ideas.
Right.
It's such a useful tool, I think.
Oh, it's so useful. And then I know you and I have a long time ago looked at different translations of the Yoga Sutras and stuff, and seen how something completely different will come up. I mean, obviously different translations resonate differently for different people, but having a translation that comes at it from an angle that you're receptive to, but maybe
hadn't heard before.
Yeah, but is nonetheless an appealing approach, and then right?
It opens up, like you were saying.
Opening up, and then not needing it to sort of fit back in to your own perspective, but not wanting to reabsorb it into your old way of thinking, but to let your old way of thinking sort of right, like a snake losing its skin, and then you have a new skin, and it's a great skin, and your old skin was great too, but like it's time to have the new skin, right?
Yes.
Should we talk about our topic?
Sure. So I guess a little background maybe just to fill in. Debbie asked, well, what should we talk about? And
An excellent question.
I said one topic that has been coming to my mind lately is this idea of loving the self. There are many, many ways to interpret that phrase, so it's a very open-ended topic. I wanted to maybe start with I'm not sure what you call it, the meditation or the
Metta exercise?
Right. I'm not even sure what you call this.
I call it a Buddhist exercise for loving kindness, but some people will call it the metta, M-E-T-T-A, metta prayer.
Okay.
I tend to steer away from words like prayer just because I feel like they mean different things to different people.
Yes.
And I don't think it's necessary to understand it. But yes, it is sort of a classic Buddhist exercise, and I have to say, I change up the order. And I think it's completely relevant to this topic that you've been interested in. I mean, we're all interested in it, but that you brought up. Because I think self-love is harder than people think. So I think that there are sometimes this idea that you would build from something easy like self-love into broader loves and universal love. But I feel like the work, well, one, I think assuming people start with self-love is not necessarily true.
Yes.
So there's that problem. And then I think what the work requires in this loving kindness meditation, at the end, it can be so heartbreaking, and so even though it's liberating, that at the end I think you have to remind yourself that you love yourself. Because part of it is letting go of hate and resentment and all these negative things, and then to realize to let go of it's great, but then that simultaneously requires knowing that you had it, and that how long you've had it, you always could have let it go, but you didn't want to, or didn't know how to is probably more accurate. Most of us don't know how to. I don't think we wouldn't want to if we
had the tools and the
if
means.
we had the tools, and if we knew what it meant. Like, we have this idea that we're absolving someone or forgiving, like it's all about the other person, when really, of course, it's not. It's in large part, I mean, it's not that it's not about that person, but it also is in large part about our relationship with ourselves, right?
Yes. A good friend of mine, I don't know if he still has it as his email signature, but it's a great signature that just says, hate is baggage.
Yeah.
That
Done.
it's this thing that we choose to carry with us. If only it were as easy as setting it down, and in some ways it is, but it's knowing how to untangle ourselves from that baggage.
So there's an image that I kind of like, because maybe it's visceral for me. I don't know if it'll work for you or not, but I feel like it's when you have a splinter. But when someone goes to pull it out, it hurts. Like, it hurts so bad. Like, your splinter hurts. It's going to hurt worse to pull it out than it hurt when it was in. But then when it's out, you feel good.
Right.
So it's a
process of extraction.
Right. That it's hard to want.
Yes.
And so with my kids, like, you can't convince them. You just do it.
Yeah.
And because it's medically, it's the right thing to do. But
absolutely.
With this stuff, where we don't necessarily, we think we can manage the pain of that anger, or the pain of that resentment or hatred or whatever that negativity is, we might not even register that it's pain. Kind of like your splinter doesn't hurt till you step your foot down, right? Kind of thing. Or it seems like that to let go of it is going to take something essential from you. Right?
Right.
And I think that's a big part of it.
It's almost part of, it can become a part of your identity in some cases, and you almost become attached to this way of being that, well, this is who I am.
Right, and then you layer your ideas of yourself on top of that premise,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then to pull that out seems all of a sudden more dangerous to all the layers that have come since then, because they've all been shaped by that and are maybe feel
Threatened.
yeah,
Or,
right. How are they going to survive? And maybe they don't.
Right.
In fact, and maybe that's part of the greatness, right? Right. So they may not survive, but how terrifying.
Right.
Who I am right this very second might not exist in a day. Like,
Right.
ah.
Right.
Um,
That's where I think going back to these practices of meditation, of creating these spaces and times where we can work on just observing without judgment what is rising up in our minds, in our hearts, or just in our feelings, and saying, oh, that's happening.
right.
Is that something that is adding something good to my life?
Right.
And if you can get to that kind
Finding
of
that space, yeah.
that external,
Yeah.
unbiased, somewhat perspective,
Right.
and look at it, then it becomes easier to
Absolutely, but
look at
finding
that
that, yeah,
splinter.
absolutely, right, with objectivity, right?
Yes,
Like that's
yes.
why you bring your splinter to your friend or whatever. Say, does this look bad? And they're like, ah, yes, pull it out, and you're like, oh, I was hoping you would say no. It'll fall out. I think that finding that space is challenging and sort of unknown to most of us at some point until we learn about it. I don't think I understood about that well into my adulthood. And I think that's one of the things about the actual physical practice that can be helpful. Because
Yes.
stuff comes up, and God knows it doesn't matter if you hit your headstand or not. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? But what comes up matters, right?
Yes.
But we have that safe space where we're like, oh, I'm furious, or I feel stupid, or I'm mad at myself, or I did get it, and now I feel better than Joe next to me, or
Which
whatever.
is just as bad in some ways, right?
Absolutely just as bad. But flip sides of the same coin, right?
Right.
And maybe that's where that ego stuff comes from, is because it is just the flip side of the I'm not good enough or I'm better. Like this ridiculous binary that we don't need. But I do think that is a nice place for us to practice finding that space,
Absolutely.
right? And we don't even have to, no one else has to even know that we've had that experience, right? Because
Right.
like you're in the middle of your practice and you have it and you're like, But being able to do it in our daily lives, that's like a big leap, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's taking the training wheels off.
Yes. That's this idea of taking your practice off of the mat, I
Yeah.
think,
Which I like, because that's a different way than I've ever heard somebody using it. But even though I'm sure that, I mean, it's so obvious that that's what it should mean, but I hear people use it differently. So anyway.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I don't. Yes, taking your practice off the mat, yeah. And being able to use these tools that we've
developed within our practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know something that you've talked about in a lot of our practices is just the 8 limbs.
Yeah.
And that the asana practice is one of 8.
Right.
And I think for many people, their introduction to yoga is the asana practice, and it's great that is available to people.
Absolutely.
To kind of get the foot in the door,
Yeah.
to see.
Right.
But then at some point, recognizing that, oh, there is more to it than just this rote sequence of this and then this and then this posture. Bringing those other 7 branches within the asana practice. My feeling is that a lot of those branches, especially some of the later ones, get somewhat glossed over. Like, don't worry about that. You know, that's for later type of thing.
And that's a real funny thing, because on the one hand, you can't get somewhere where you're not ready to be yet. On the other hand, if you're told not to, it needs to be kept present, just in the larger practice or conversation or teaching, right? So it depends on it's the student, but a lot of times it's also the teacher, right? Teacher keeping these things present. You don't want to make them, you're not ready yet. Like, it shouldn't be, I think it's a tricky thing. The teacher needs to know it at all times and needs to know how and when to introduce it. So, for example, when I was in New York, and it was right after 9/11, and there was a lot of pain, and everybody was in a lot of pain in all these yoga classes, and they were huge yoga classes. So I don't think that it can happen in a huge yoga class. 60 people. And the teacher was very intent on talking about forgiveness and talking about letting go of hate, but she did it while we were doing the asana practice. So it was almost as if you were soaking something in yoga, but like if you imagine taking a piece of stale bread and soaking it in milk and then it gets soft, it's almost like that's what she was doing. Like, the yoga was softening us, and so then this other stuff could come in, and we were just receptive to it, and we didn't fight it. Like, no, we should be angry, or we should be hurt, or we should be, whatever. Yes. It just came in like this nice honey or something. And so you could hear stuff that you might not normally hear. And one thing she said that I remember, she was like, I know many people have issues with their mother. She goes, I just want you to know, if you're in this room today, that means somebody kept you alive long enough, either for someone else to care for you or for you to, grow up and be able to now take your own path. And that's, first of all, it's a very low bar, but her point was open up just a little bit. Let go of the hate just a little bit, the resentment, whatever. But then it was the most delicious letting go, So obviously I must have been a person who needed to hear it. And now I can't even believe I ever needed to hear it, because I can't believe it doesn't even make sense to me that I would have needed to hear it. Now I'm like, that's just not even relevant. But that's great. So, you know what I mean? But anyway, so I think there are a lot of ways that you can start to bring in the other 7 branches that are subtle, or, as opposed to, talking about it explicitly, you can just infuse a practice with it. On the other hand, I also think as a teacher, in a way, it's irresponsible not to let people know that there's more than just the physical practice if they don't. If they don't know that. If they're not receptive to that, that's fine. It's not our job to shove it down their throat, but just to let them at least see the door.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And just know that door is there, even if they don't want to open it.
Right. And then I also wonder how much of it is a matter of being open to the experience of those other branches.
Yes.
So, and I bring this up as somebody who loves to think about things and loves to try to conceptualize, build these mental models of things. But at a certain point, as far as my understanding goes, you have to throw all of that to the side and just be open to the experience of breathing, or to the experience of sitting and focusing. And you can talk about it all you want, but at some point you have to actually do it.
So I 100% agree. I'm going to change the metaphor from throwing it away, though. I think you might think of it as a flower. And you grow, and then you have a bud. And then at some point, the bud falls away and you blossom. So I don't think you have a blossomy flower without the bud, right? And so I think what you're talking about is about the mental understanding and constructions and conceptualizing and ways of thinking about it is all part of your flower growing into that bud. And then once your bud is ready, then the flower opens almost effortlessly. You know what I mean? Or inevitably. Like you don't actively throw it away. And you don't plus of course that's got too much negativity.
Sure.
Like I sometimes fantasize that when I can get to like a total place where my brain is silent, it'll be because I don't have anything I'm working on anymore. It's not like I will have controlled my mind. I will have thought the things I need to think and resolved the conflicts I've needed to resolve and accepted the things I need to accept. And then I won't have to do that kind of thinking anymore.
There was something in that for me, that this getting to this place of silence, that I have this feeling lately that it's not about getting rid of thoughts or
Right.
getting rid of
Right, I agree.
That it's just more like what you were talking about when you're walking in the woods, just letting those thoughts be there
Right.
and just saying, there's
Right.
more to my mind than these thoughts, or there's more to me. Maybe is a better way of saying it.
Totally. And then I think, and so then if you're in this wash, you hear this sometimes when people are talking about meditations, right? About letting things come in and go out. So I guess what you're not doing is snagging on them, right?
Yes.
And you're just, grasping and then controlling.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm afraid that I'm going to come to a realization about myself that I am don't think I can handle, I am going to not be able to let these thoughts happen without me feeling the need to control them, or maybe even just downright stifle them.
Yes.
But if I'm not worried about that, which is a pretty terrific and pretty rarefied place to get probably, but if I'm not worried about that, then maybe I can, and that's maybe, when people talk about really seeing or seeing the truth, but just not manipulating the thoughts that come to your head in order to protect yourself.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. Accepting them. It also brings to mind these ideas of attachment and aversion.
Right.
So not running from those thoughts that we identify as worrisome or troublesome or bad. And similarly not running towards those thoughts that, I hit my headstand.
Yes.
I got it. Done.
Exactly. Check mark. I mean, look, you're getting the bell is tolling for you. But I think that for most of us, managing our self-acceptance or self-love, or however we want to think about it, we have to manage it to protect ourselves, or we think we have to manage. In our current state, in order to keep the stasis, we have to manage it to keep our current way of understanding ourselves. So you can't just let anything come in or go away.
You do have to work with the thoughts that are self-deprecating or negative, or working with the conditions that give rise to those.
Right.
And being open to saying, maybe I don't need my second dessert, or whatever it is.
Right.
We all have our own things, our own attachments.
Right.
That finding that space where you can look at that and see if it's worth the negative feelings that may arise after the fact of engaging in that.
And I agree 100% with that. And I think one of the tricky things is that it's the underlying the underlying self-concept or whatever the thing that we're working with, we could just replace it with a thing that seems better, right? But not, because it's still a crutch. So let's say I realize that I'm a huge consumer, and I buy things partly because it makes me feel good to buy them, and partly because I think it makes people know I'm fabulous and have great taste and look how cool I am. And I realize that's wrong. So then I decide I don't want to be a consumer anymore. I want to be a yoga practitioner. But I can still take all my underlying thoughts, or take my underlying insecurities that made me need to be a consumer, and I can use those. They can still ride into the I'm a yogi now. So even though it's a much better crutch, it's still do you know what I mean? I'm still using it to elevate my self-esteem and to make me feel special or better.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Finding that space to step outside of that game, almost this mental game that I need to do X so that I will be accepted, or
accepting that these external opinions or outside, what other people think of us
Right.
is neither here nor there. I mean, people will think what they will think,
And of course, we can't control them.
Right.
And then two, is it really, how important is it anyway?
Right.
Right.
But then there's still that internal, like, I guess there's that other side that I think of the phrase, we are our own worst critics.
Of course.
And I heard somebody talk once, and they were saying, we know ourselves better than anybody else in some ways.
In some ways, but we still have our own
biases
and interpretations, or we've been told certain ways to think about certain things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we now assume. So, right, it's like you have the second dessert or you don't. You feel good about yourself if you don't. You feel bad about yourself if you do. Probably. I mean, I'm assuming that's how we're going to look at it just right now. But really, we're the same. You know what I mean? I'm not a better person because I didn't have it.
Right.
I'm not a bad person because I did.
Right.
And all you have to do is change it to broccoli, and then it's the opposite. Yeah, so we know ourselves better than anyone else, but in some ways we don't.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm sure you find this. People who are close to me can give me insights into myself that blindside me.
Mm-hmm.
Blindside me. And yet, I'm like, duh.
Right.
Like, you
Right.
know,
Once you hear it, or once it
Right.
sinks in, it's like, oh yeah.
And if it's told to you with loving kindness, then it's so great
Yes.
to learn it.
Yes.
And so I happen to know that we are both very lucky because we both have people who can share things with us, insights that can be delivered with compassion
Yeah.
and love. And
Yes.
so that's great,
Yes. Yes.
right? I mean, if someone's always criticizing you or pointing out your foibles or catching your mistakes or letting you know you're not good enough, and then you just, I mean,
I imagine that must be a huge part of the art of teaching, is recognizing where somebody's at
absolutely.
and knowing what the next step is to getting further on that path
Mm-hmm.
of whatever direction or branch that person is
Is
at.
ready, yeah, where they're at, where they're able to go. And let's say you think, oh, maybe it would be great if they could get to, point 4. That's not going to work for them. They could go to point 3 or 5. I mean, of course, because it's not linear, right?
Yes.
Just thank goodness.
Right.
You don't start with branch 1 and move to branch 8 sequentially, like the numbers, but to figure out how to soften or to make it presentable in a way that someone can be receptive, or to be patient.
Mm-hmm.
To be patient when they might not be ready to go where you sort of have in your own mind that you would like them to get.
Right. Or just being that point of support to say, well, just stay where you're at and don't slide back.
Right. And where to push and where to pull back, but to do it again always has to be done with kindness, right?
Yes.
And teachers have, all teachers, parents to children, whenever you're in a sort of that kind of relationship where you're wanting to help someone grow,
Mm-hmm.
you just have to be very careful to make sure that you protect their tendernesses. They're vulnerable to you, right? I mean, not everybody. Some people are not, but the ones that are, you have to know and to give them gentle guidance. Some people can just take a little bit more, and that's fine too. I think yoga is a tool. It can be used poorly. That's why you hear about all these, sort of terrible stories that you hear about. I think people become vulnerable.
Yes.
They trust somebody just because they're called their teacher with probably not enough vetting, or with some, and then they completely just are willing to believe that whatever they say is good and right, and that's so scary.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you have to make sure that you discourage that.
Yes.
Yes. While still being a guide and helpful, and and I think, some people need that more than others, obviously. Some people don't need that, but some of these teachers who've done bad things, they've probably the majority of their students are fine and just either overlook it or don't notice it or just don't succumb to it.
We're strong enough that
Right.
any of that just
Right.
didn't even register.
Right. Plenty of people come in and whatever, but the vulnerable ones are the ones you need to be extra careful to make sure that you don't use yoga as a tool to maybe assert your authority over them.
Right.
Or you don't let them use yoga as a way to punish themselves or to subject themselves to someone's authority because maybe they have a tendency towards that.
I think that's one of the scariest things about the prospect of being a teacher is just all of that responsibility. And I'm sure it's the same as being a parent or any of these very important roles that we play in life. And I don't know how one becomes comfortable with that.
You have to believe that you are going to do your very most honest best.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And that you're not going to take advantage or allow. Like it's so, I mean, if someone, you could allow someone to give you all this authority, inappropriate authority.
Right.
And on the other hand, there are some places where it is appropriate, like, I don't think you're ready to do a back bend now. It's not because you're asserting your authority, you're doing it because you don't want them to hurt themselves.
Yes.
And so that's the difference, is when to take on that authority for their good and how to make sure that you're not
Over asserting that. Yeah.
right, and it could slip easily.
Yeah.
In our yoga community, most people are very strong, independent, self-thinking people. Usually it just feels like colleagues discussing something.
Yes.
But in the cases where it is a little different, it's important to recognize and to act accordingly.
Yeah.
You learn from making mistakes, of course.
Right. Well, I mean, that is life, right?
Right.
Going back to this topic of loving the self is forgiving yourself for those mistakes and
Right.
and learning from them.
Right.
You can't just say, no big deal.
Right. It's such a balance,
Yeah.
right, between recognizing them and admitting them and not feeling bad about it, but also correcting them and learning.
Yes.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I guess that's probably true in everything we do, right? I mean, if we're in relationships with other people, just personal relationships.
Yeah.
We mess up,
Yeah.
and we have to both not do that again, especially
Right.
if it's something we really don't want to, but not beat ourselves up about it, but not be like, oh, who cares? 'Cause
Right.
you hurt somebody, maybe, right?
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah. It's a beautiful practice to work with these things, and
Yeah.
that's one of the amazing things from my perspective of yoga, is that it gives me these tools to work with these ideas, to work with these situations, to learn and grow and practice.
yeah, I agree. And the tools, you need the tools.
Yeah.
I think that it's a good tool set.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also a tool. That's the other thing I think that it's important to remember, is it's just a set of tools. It's your toolbox. It's your hammer and your screwdriver and your wrench and, it's your toolbox. But the toolbox is there for you to grow and to
Make use of.
use of. But then we are not there to, worship our toolbox. You know what I mean? We're not there to... you don't want to confuse the toolbox with the process. And different times you'll use different tools. And who knows, maybe sometimes you get a different toolbox. I don't know.
Right. Right. Well, I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where these different schools or these different philosophies, they are in some ways a different toolbox.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
you can say, oh, well, that's a really cool hammer in that one. That's got a feature that this other one doesn't have. I'm going to put that one in my toolbox.
Right, because I never knew that a hammer could have a hatchet on the back of it. We have one of those. I was like, that's cool, instead of the little thing with the prongs. Just even thinking of sitting still, meditate, which is so the opposite of an Ashtanga practice where we move so much. But they're both good, and yet they're seemingly they're practically the opposite. Like, right?
Mhm.
One, is very effortful in one particular way and, sweaty and muscly. And the
Mhm.
other one is effortful for some of us in a completely different way. It would be hard to believe that they were both part of the same exploration, but they are.
Right. Well, and I guess that's one thing that I've been finding through this study of the Zen school of thought, where it seems like they're almost solely focused on what I would say is the last branch of Ashtanga, samadhi.
Mm-hmm.
I think they even use that term in some of their texts.
Oh, nice.
And one of the things that I think is so interesting is that they break it down to these 4 simple rules. You just need to take the posture, sitting,
Okay.
breathe,
A particular kind of breath or just breathe?
breathe,
Okay. Okay,
just
gotcha.
breathe, and keep the eyes open,
Ah.
and open the hand of thought. Just let thoughts happen, but don't grasp them.
Fabulous.
And just do that. That's all you have to do. Like to distill it down to
And
something.
I agree. And so I always tell people that I'm like, oh my God, I think sitting is the hardest posture for me. You know what I mean? Like for me, it would be much easier to do 10 sun salutes than to have to sit still. But I think you're like, why do they have the 8th branch only? Like maybe the rest of us need this first 7, Obviously that's not a coincidence that Samadhi is the 8th of ours and it's what they're doing. But like,
And I'm sure that someone who knows that philosophy deeper would say, well, there are corollaries to the other 7 branches.
probably.
That,
Right.
Like you're taking precepts and you're acting according to the yamas and the niyamas.
Right. Right. That it's in there. It may just not be. It's probably not like
structured the same way.
Exactly.
Again, that's just this other perspective that it's like, oh, well, that's all you have to do.
Right.
Easy as that, and there you go. Just do that every day, and if everybody just sat in meditation,
Once a day or twice a day.
yeah, easier
Right.
said than done.
Easier said than done.
For
Big
sure.
time. I know, it's so funny. Well, and that's the other thing is I think we have to be careful, especially for those of us who find ourselves in some sort of Ashtanga practice, to not get too caught up in the sort of work ethic. I work harder. I work out. The harder I work, 6 days a week I practice, and that makes me
Better prepared to be the best.
right.
Or
Better prepared to sit down and do nothing. But right, I do think that it's easy to put our value system onto this new system. Harder maybe with the Zen Buddhism because of the nothingness of the doing, as opposed to you think of like this American
yes, work
ethic.
Yes.
That's what I was looking for. Yeah. Then it just reinforces this concept we have. Not that every concept we have to let go of, but every concept we have we should be at least willing to consider letting go of.
Mm-hmm.
Some new schools play in very conveniently and very subtly into ways of thinking that we just take for granted, that we maybe shouldn't. Or concepts like work ethic. Not that I'm saying it's bad, but we have to at least recognize that it's not inherent.
Right.
Right?
I think as Westerners and this, especially American work ethic, I think even outside of the scope of yoga and
Oh, yeah.
these types of practices, I think the rest of the world looks at us like, what are you people doing? Like, that's not living in some sense. We've become so single-mindedly focused on productivity and maximizing our time that we've taken out the humanity of our daily life. In some cases, I think we're seeing that in the modern workforce, and even in the current time where people are staying at home. I'm hearing about this erosion. You would think, oh, working from home, this is great. I'm in control of my workspace now, but
there's people who are facing a further erosion because now they are expected to be on call all of the time.
Oh.
It's
So work is even becoming more consuming. Well, and I have to say, so this is sort of weird, but like, I mean, we are closed for a good reason. We are closed because it is not safe to be open for public health. And yet I feel guilty not working. And I have to remind myself, I am not being lazy. I am trying to be part of our society's effort to quell this pandemic.
Yes.
But there's this nagging, you know, you should, like work.
Yes.
And it's like, no, I mean, I'm getting over it. But it'd be great. It is supposed to be this thing that helps us get up and go and, you know, be productive, but it becomes like this prison.
It's weight on our shoulders that we carry around.
Sometimes even like if you're going on a vacation, like under normal times, not right now.
Yeah.
And you feel like you have to see this and that and do X, Y, and Z, and you need to be, you know, and it's like...
Becomes the forced march.
Right. You have to be productive on your vacation.
Right.
But it's tied in because, of course, you want to get as much out of your vacation as you can, both because you got this weird work thing, but also because you sacrificed so much for it. Right.
To get there.
So it has to be worth it. It has to be
Yes.
worth all that.
Yes.
Well, again, it's what to be able, back to what you were saying about being able to make that space between you and what's going on. And so you can see why. Why are you doing X, Y, and Z, as opposed to just taking it as it's good to do or it's bad to do, right? Like, but to understand what your motivation behind it is, or what your ulterior motives are, or your good motives, or
Right.
you know what I mean? And then to be okay with if we find something about ourselves that is unsavory, to be able to say, okay, all right, well, now I see that, and I'm going to not beat myself up, and nor am I going to defend it, right?
I'm going to work on
I'm
it.
going to work on it, and yeah.
I see it there. I see that splinter. It's deep. There's got to be a way to get it out. It's not going to happen instantly.
Right.
And that's okay.
Right.
Like,
And that's the other, right, okay, so I have a splinter, maybe I'll put a Band-Aid over it until I can figure out how to get it out.
right.
Right?
Right.
But a real Band-Aid, not like
Yeah.
a metaphorical Band-Aid. Like,
Yeah.
I am putting a Band-Aid on because it will hurt less when I have the Band-Aid there
Yeah.
to protect it. Depending, I guess, how far it's
And it's a reminder that that's there.
right.
Something to work on.
I like that because, I mean, you know, the Band-Aid is such a metaphor people use all the time, and to also see the Band-Aid as a positive,
Right.
right, instead of just a negative. But the Band-Aid is there to help us get
It's
through.
almost like the string on your finger.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Exactly. And I know not everybody likes this part, but like I feel like for some people maybe it doesn't work, and for some people it does. But to be like, I mean, really, what does it all matter? Like, not like this huge, beautiful universe we live in that is so far beyond our even imaginings, right? And so beautiful and complex in ways we can't even see.
Yes.
That if I am making a mistake, some teeny tiny little mistake in my personal life, like, I mean, it doesn't matter in the big, in the
Right.
really big universe way. It matters in each of us because this is the life we have. But
Right.
It helps make it easier to maybe.
That's really interesting, going back to this topic of loving the self, that maybe at some point, if it's really a problem, you can work on it. But otherwise, just stop perseverating on perfecting in everything.
Absolutely. Perfection is torturous.
Yeah.
It's just a way of always being able to dig at yourself, right?
Mhm.
I mean, we don't want to go the other way.
Look past, yeah.
Right. But yeah, if you get everything and then there's this one little thing and then you're just going to harp on it and then God knows there's going to be another one that pops up.
Right.
I'm so right. It's like whack-a-mole.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, good enough, not good enough. Good enough for what?
Right.
Not good enough for what? And I mean, and then of course, to counter that, every teeny little thing we do matters to those closest to us.
Yes.
Right? So which is both maybe terrifying, but also wonderful. Like, that nothing matters, and yet everything matters because we live in this teeny tiny corner of the
Yes.
universe.
Yes.
But it's our little corner?
Well, I think what really matters is how we respond to the things that are happening around us.
Right.
So if there's some small thing that happens and I latch onto that and blow it out of proportion,
Right.
well then all of a sudden that little thing just gets amplified.
Right.
Or if I just say, whatever, like,
Right.
not
And we
worth
so
my
often
time.
amplify the bad stuff and dismiss the good stuff because we assume the
Yes.
good stuff, and we are
Yes.
mad at and then we've made things worse.
Yes.
Which
the
is okay
saying
too.
is mountains out of molehills.
Right. 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 And yet, just to counter that with another cliche, there's the straw that broke the camel's back. Like, you don't want to ignore all your molehills until you have a mountain and then the camel's back is broken. I love mixing metaphors. I think there's no answer ever. I think everything is always shifting.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
In a good way. We don't want to just be pat, because then we're just living rote lives.
Yes.
If we figured it all out and then we just marched along in our little marching orders, no matter how idyllic it was, it's not living.
Absolutely. Part of the joy of being alive is to be surrounded by this wonder.
Right, which goes back to what you were saying about how much you love to think. You'd always want to be able to think about what's coming, but like maybe as we sort of evolve and grow, what we get to think about changes. So it's not like we stop thinking, we just become open to things. I don't want to say on a different plane because that sounds too woo-woo, but you know what I mean.
I would put it as being more open to the present moment. I think that's what the practice can enable.
Right.
Because the present moment is always changing.
Always.
And
that is one of the coronavirus has shown us that. Right? When you think about whatever you were thinking about on March 16th, for example, I'm just picking a day, I don't mean the actual day, but we had what we thought was happening, and then a week later, and then 2 weeks later, and then what we thought was the right thing to do, and then 3 months later. You know what I mean? It's been a constant shift.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everything is shifting all the time. This one we get this is real clear. It's like so big and in our face that we all are seeing it. And people all want to like stabilize everything because there's this illusion that things were,
that we have control.
Right. Which I think is why, I know the economy partly is because it's real and there's, financial needs and this and that, but I think it's also because the economy is such a human thing. So we can control that easier than we feel like it's under our control more so than like bigger things, like nature, the environment, it seems like it's just this like kind of finite concrete thing that we can wrap our minds around.
Yeah.
But yes, everything is always changing.
Yeah.
One of the things a lot of people are doing these days is cleaning house projects that have taken you 10 years to get to.
Sure. Yeah.
So I am among them. So I moved a bookshelf out and I found an old picture from 2003. So
wow.
I don't know how it had fallen back there, but anyway, I really liked it. But then I was going to do some rearranging of some pictures, and so I was looking for a picture of Sam, and I found one from his 3-year-old preschool class, and and it's just so. Of course, I think he's adorable, but I'm like, how? It was so silly. He's 11 now, and in this picture, so he was 3 or so, and
the amount of change.
Oh my gosh.
That must
the amount of change
in those 8 years.
Yeah. And it's hard, because you live each day happens one day at a time, and then they accumulate. And I know people have these feelings all the time. You look back at wedding albums or pictures of our childhood or pictures of our children if we have them, and I think it's part of what is so poignant is just recognizing that everything is always changing.
Yes.
Because
and an experience like that really brings it front and center.
Yeah.
When you see a bigger span of time,
Right.
that shift just instantly.
Right. Right. And that must be what makes it sort of bittersweet. It's not that it is bittersweet, but I think because in the moment you condense 8 years into like 1 second.
Yes.
And that's actually not how time works. So luckily,
Right.
those 8 years took 8 years to live. But there's something in that, seeing that picture where you feel like you're 8 years ago, and then it's like this, like a wrinkle in time kind of thing.
Yes.
And it's weird to be in those two times at the same time.
Yes.
And then to realize you were you then, and you couldn't have known who you are now. You know what I mean? And then
Right.
who you are now is not who you were then, but you are. And yet you are, right?
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting thought experiment of what is the self and
Right.
what defines you.
Right.
And I think that could be a fun topic for another conversation.
Yeah,
and,
that's a big one.
yeah. I love the idea of multiple universes or parallel universes
Yes.
and all these different possibilities of
Yeah.
actions. Thinking about the choices that we make or don't make,
Mm-hmm.
I think it goes back to this idea that things are always changing in ways that we cannot control.
Oh my God. Endless little. So a stick got in my chaco today and it didn't hurt me. It kind of bruised my foot a little bit.
Mhm.
But it made me remember that like sometimes something as small as tripping and falling somewhere, you break your arm, you get an infection. The little things happen all the time, and some of them are little shifts and some of them are big shifts.
Yes.
And some of them are decisions we made or don't make, but some of them are completely out of our control. Someone else did something and that affected us in this way, and yeah, it's hard to not have multiple universes.
Yeah.
Because there's so many, everything that happens, which is everything all the time, right?
Yes.
And every one of those everythings that happens all the time all have like infinite permutations in all
Yeah.
directions and however many dimensions there are, and it's just impossible.
Boggles the mind.
It's awesome. Yeah, no, I love that boggle, and I love getting out. Like I like logic, like as in like the kind you study, if A then B kind of stuff.
Yes.
I really do like that, and I feel like that helps form the way we think as a society. But I
Sure.
also notice that nowadays that there's a lot of stuff that happens sort of outside of that sometimes I'm resistant to, and sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm just in my era kind of thing. I mean, so I have different thoughts because I feel like if it can't fit in logic, well, then you have to be careful, because then people can make assumptions and arguments that aren't really maybe valid. But on the other
or
hand,
testable.
right? Testable, perfect. But on the other hand, I also think for the beauty of logic and like maybe scientific method, for the beauty and the testability and the reproducibility of them, there's got to be something that, not dismiss or abandon, but that can't be inside that framework, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it still is real,
Right.
or is possible.
I hope so.
Me too. Me too.
Well, I think this is a perfect spot to end our recording.
Excellent.
So thank you for taking some time to have a conversation with me today, Debbie.
Thank you, Charles. This has been delightful, as always. I always look forward to talking to you.